I am Emma, 29 years old, and this is the story of how I finally broke free. After years of seeking approval that never came, I graduated college with honors in psychology. That should have been my proudest moment. Instead, at my graduation dinner, my parents uttered words that shattered my world. "We wish you were never born." What they never expected was my response, words that silenced an entire restaurant and changed my life forever. If you've ever felt unappreciated by those who should love you most, this story might resonate with you. Before I continue, let me know where you're reading from in the comments and hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family. Growing up in Brooklyn, an affluent suburb of Boston, my childhood looked perfect from the outside. Our colonial-style house with its manicured lawn and my parents, Richard and Margaret Thompson, were the picture of upper-middle-class success. My father was a corporate attorney at a prestigious firm downtown, and my mother was heavily involved in local charity organizations, not out of compassion but for the social standing it provided. From my earliest memories, nothing I did was ever quite good enough. When I brought home an A- in third grade, my father looked at the paper with such disappointment you'd have thought I'd failed entirely. "The Mitchell girl got straight A's," he said, sliding the paper back across the kitchen counter. "I expect better next time." I remember nodding, fighting back tears as I retreated to my room. That pattern continued throughout my childhood. If I won second place in a science fair, the conversation centered on who won first and what I should have done differently. When I made the swim team but wasn't the fastest, dinner conversation revolved around how I needed to train harder. There was always someone better, always a higher bar I'd failed to reach. My father had a specific vision for my future: medicine, law, or business. Nothing else was acceptable. "Those are careers with prestige," he'd say during our Sunday dinners, cutting his roast beef into precise pieces. "Everything else is settling for less." My mother was no better, though her focus was different. Where my father demanded academic and career excellence, she scrutinized my appearance and social connections. "Emma, you could be so pretty if you lost 10 pounds, she'd say while examining herself in the hallway mirror. Or, "Why aren't you friends with the Mitchell girl? Her father is on the hospital board." Every friendship, every outfit, every aspect of my appearance was evaluated for how it would reflect on the family. The only person who seemed to see me for who I was my grandmother, Beatrice, my father's mother. Unlike her son, she had a warmth that made her home feel like a sanctuary. "You have a beautiful mind," she'd tell me when I shared my thoughts about books we'd both read. "Never let anyone dim your light." During visits to her small apartment across town, I discovered psychology books on her shelves. She'd been a counselor before retiring, and our conversations about human behavior and emotional health sparked something in me. For the first time, I found a subject that fascinated me completely. "Psychology is for people who couldn't handle real science," my father scoffed when I mentioned my interest at 15. "It's all subjective nonsense." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "Besides, darling, those people barely make any money." Despite their dismissal, I secretly devoured psychology books, hiding them under my mattress like contraband. When it came time for college applications, I applied to psychology programs despite my parents' insistence on pre-law or pre-med tracks. This led to the biggest fight we'd ever had. "We're not paying for you to get some useless degree," my father shouted, his face red with anger. "Not when you have the capabilities to do something worthwhile." "Psychology is * worthwhile," I argued back, for once standing my ground. "People need help understanding themselves and others. People need to pull themselves together and stop whining," he retorted. "This discussion is over." It wasn't over, though. My grandmother Beatrice stepped in, offering to help with my tuition. "Your future belongs to you, not to your parents," she told me over tea in her small kitchen. "Study what calls to your heart." My parents reluctantly agreed, but their disapproval was palpable. Every holiday break was filled with thinly veiled comments about real careers and wasting potential. During my sophomore year, Beatrice passed away unexpectedly. I was devastated, losing not just my grandmother but my only true ally in the family. She left me a modest inheritance that helped with remaining tuition costs, along with a letter I keep to this day. "Your compassion is your strength," she wrote. "The world needs more hearts like yours." After her funeral, my parents seemed to double down on their criticism. Without Beatrice to buffer their disapproval, I felt more alone than ever. I threw myself into my studies, determined to graduate with honors, hoping that academic excellence might finally win their approval. All the while, anxiety gnawed at me. I started having panic attacks before family visits, my stomach knotting with dread at the inevitable criticism that awaited. By senior year, I developed coping mechanisms, deep breathing, positive self-talk, seeking support from the few friends who understood. But the deep-seated need for parental approval never quite went away. Despite everything, some childish part of me still hoped that one day they'd see me, really see me, and be proud of who I'd become. My college experience at Northeastern University was transformative, despite the shadow my parents cast over it. For the first time, I found myself surrounded by people who valued ideas and conversation without constant judgment. My roommate Sarah was studying journalism and had a refreshing directness I admired immediately. "Your parents sound like nightmares," she said bluntly after hearing about one particularly unpleasant holiday visit. "You know that's not normal, right?" Then there was Ethan from my research methods class, whose quick humor and genuine interest in psychology matched my own. He'd grown up in foster care and had a perspective on family that challenged my ingrained beliefs. "Family is who treats you like you matter," he told me once over coffee. "Sometimes that's not the people who share your DNA." Their friendship created a safe space where I could be authentic without fear of criticism. Slowly, I started to discover who I was outside of my parents' expectations. I joined the Psychology Honor Society, volunteered at a crisis text line, and found myself drawn specifically to developmental psychology, the study of how people grow and change throughout their lives. In my junior year, I caught the attention of Dr. Klein, a well-respected professor in the field. She invited me to assist with her research on resilience in young adults who had faced early life adversity. The irony wasn't lost on me, studying resilience while trying to build my own. "You have exceptional insight, Emma," Dr. Klein told me after I presented preliminary findings to the research team. "Have you considered graduate school? With your abilities, you could make significant contributions to the field." Her validation was like water in a desert. I worked harder than ever, staying late in the lab, refining research protocols, and helping to prepare presentations for conferences. When she suggested I apply for a position at the Bowman Institute for Human Development in Seattle, I was both terrified and exhilarated. The institute was nationally recognized, and such a position would be a tremendous start to my career. "They're very interested in you," Dr. Klein said when she called me into her office one snowy February afternoon. "Your application was impressive, and my recommendation couldn't have been stronger. They want you to start in August after graduation." I sat in stunned silence, clutching the official offer letter, a real job at a prestigious research institute, doing work I was passionate about. This was validation that my chosen path had value, despite what my parents had always claimed. As graduation approached, I threw myself into final exams and completing my thesis on emotional regulation strategies. The work was demanding but fulfilling. For the first time, I could envision a future where I built a career I loved, rather than one chosen to please others. 3 weeks before graduation, my mother called. I braced myself for the usual questioning about my plans, ready to defend my job offer yet again. "Your father and I have been talking," she said, her voice carrying its usual crisp efficiency. "We'd like to attend your graduation ceremony." I nearly dropped the phone. In our previous conversations, they'd been vague about whether they'd come, citing busy schedules and the inconvenience of travel from Boston to the university. "Really?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. "Of course, darling. It's a milestone after all, and your father has some connections. He'd like you to meet people who might help you find a more suitable position than this research thing." I should have recognized the agenda behind their sudden interest, but hope clouded my judgment. Perhaps they were finally coming around. Maybe seeing me graduate with honors would make them realize that psychology was a legitimate field and that I had talent worth respecting. With newfound optimism, I threw myself into graduation preparations. I bought a new dress, a sophisticated navy blue that looked professional yet stylish. I made dinner reservations. cleaned my apartment obsessively in case they wanted to see it, and rehearsed ways to present my job offer in terms that might impress them. "They're really coming," I told Sarah as we tried on our graduation gowns in our apartment. "Maybe things will be different now." Sarah looked skeptical but supportive. "Just remember who you are," she said, adjusting my graduation cap, "no matter what they say or do." The night before graduation, I lay awake imagining scenarios where my father would shake my hand with genuine pride, where my mother would hug me without stiffness, where they'd finally say the words I'd longed to hear: "We're proud of you." The fantasy was so vivid I could almost believe it might happen. Morning came with sunshine streaming through my windows and butterflies in my stomach. As I applied my makeup carefully and styled my hair, I felt like I was preparing for the most important job interview of my life. Because, in a way, I was still trying to get hired as the daughter they could love unconditionally. Graduation morning arrived with perfect New England spring weather, sunshine warming the historic campus buildings and a gentle breeze stirring the leaves. I woke up early, too nervous to sleep, and spent extra time getting ready. My navy blue dress hung pressed and ready, and I laid out the honor cords I'd earned through my academic achievements. "Today's the day they finally see me," I whispered to my reflection as I applied mascara with a slightly trembling hand. Sarah knocked on my bedroom door. "Your chariot awaits, valedictorian," she joked, though I wasn't actually valedictorian, just graduating summa cum laude. We arrived at the campus arena 2 hours early as instructed. The place was already buzzing with excited graduates adjusting caps and taking photos. I texted my parents to let them know where they could find seats with a good view. "We're already here," came my mother's reply. "Your father wanted to make sure we got proper seating." I spotted them in the family waiting area, my father in an expensive charcoal suit that screamed corporate success, my mother in a cream-colored dress and jacket, her pearl necklace catching the light. They looked like they were attending a business function rather than their daughter's graduation. "You made it," I said, approaching with a hopeful smile. "Traffic was lighter than expected," my father replied, checking his watch. "The ceremony starts at 10:00, correct? I have calls scheduled for later this afternoon." "No hug, no you look beautiful or we're proud of you, just a concern about his schedule." "Yes, 10:00, I confirmed, my smile faltering slightly. "It should last about 2 hours." 2 hours for everyone to walk across a stage, my mother sighed. They could simply mail the diplomas and save everyone the time. I swallowed my disappointment. "I should go line up with my department. I'll see you afterward by the psychology building for photos." They nodded and I walked away, reminding myself that the day was still young. There was still time for things to change. The ceremony itself was a blur of emotions. Sitting among my fellow psychology graduates, I felt a surge of pride when our department was called and we stood together. Walking across that stage, hearing my name announced with asterisk summa cum laude following it, gripping my diploma case, these moments felt monumental. I scanned the audience as I crossed the stage, spotting my parents in the 10th row. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of pride on my father's face as he raised his hand in a small wave, but it disappeared so quickly I might have imagined it. After the ceremony, amid the chaos of thousands of graduates and families, I found my parents waiting by the psychology building as planned. My mother immediately reached to adjust my cap, which had slightly shifted. "Stand straight, Emma," she instructed as my father positioned his expensive camera. "No one wants photos of poor posture." We took the obligatory shots, me holding my diploma, me with each parent individually, one family photo that a passing student captured for us. Throughout it all, their compliments were surface level at best. "The ceremony was well organized," my father remarked. "Your hair looks nice pulled back like that," my mother added. "Not congratulations or we're proud of you asterisk, just comments on logistics and appearance." As we walked toward the parking area, my father surprised me by saying, "We thought we might take you to dinner to celebrate. There's a French place downtown, El Shadow. I hear the food is excellent." El Shaddai was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, the kind of place my parents would normally reserve for business dinners or anniversary celebrations, never somewhere they'd take me. That sounds wonderful, I replied, hope flickering back to life. Perhaps this fancy dinner was their way of showing they cared, of marking the occasion as special. I made reservations for 6:30, my father continued. We can meet you there if you need to change or refresh. No, I'll ride with you, I said quickly, not wanting to separate now that things seemed to be improving. My dress is fine for the restaurant, right? I glanced down at my carefully chosen outfit. My mother gave me a quick once-over. It'll do, she said with a small nod that I chose to interpret as approval. The drive to the restaurant was filled with what passed for pleasant conversation in our family. My father talking about a case he'd recently won, my mother discussing an upcoming charity gala she was helping organize. I waited for them to ask about my plans, about the job offer I'd accepted, but they didn't. Still, I remained optimistic as we pulled up to the restaurant's valet parking. El Shaddai was everything its reputation promised. Crystal chandeliers, pristine white tablecloths, servers in formal attire, and a hushed atmosphere of exclusivity. The maitre d' recognized my father immediately. Mr. Thompson, welcome back. Your table is ready, the best in the house, as requested. We were led to a corner table near the windows with an excellent view of both the restaurant and the city beyond. My father ordered champagne without consulting the menu, and I felt a small thrill at being treated as an adult worthy of celebration. When the champagne arrived, my father raised his glass. To graduation, he said simply, not to Emma or to your achievement, just to the event itself. Still, I clinked my glass against theirs and sipped the expensive champagne, determined to enjoy this rare moment of familial harmony. This is lovely, I said, looking around at the elegant surroundings. Thank you for bringing me here. Every milestone deserves proper acknowledgement, my mother replied, studying her menu. The foie gras here is exceptional. For a brief, shining moment, as we ordered appetizers and made small talk about the restaurant's decor, I allowed myself to believe that this dinner represented a turning point in our relationship. Perhaps my graduation had finally proven my worth to them. Perhaps now, at last, I'd received the validation I'd craved for so long. The appetizers arrived, delicate plates of seared scallops for my mother, escargot for my father, and a goat cheese salad for me. As we began to eat, my father asked about other graduates in my program. Was that Mitchell girl in your department Martha's daughter? Lauren Mitchell was in business, not psychology, I replied, having only met her once at a campus mixer. Smart girl, my father nodded approvingly. Business opens doors. I imagine she has several offers already. I took a deep breath, seeing my opening. Actually, I have some good news about my job, the position at the Bowman Institute. Yes, that research place, my mother interrupted, waving her fork. DISMISS Chinese letter. What exactly will you be doing there? Filing papers and making coffee. No, mother, I said, maintaining my composure. I'll be a research associate, working directly with Dr. Harper on a longitudinal study of emotional development in adolescence. My father set down his fork. And the compensation, what does a research associate earn these days? I shared the salary figure, which was actually quite respectable for an entry-level position in my field. My father scoffed. That's what our junior paralegals make, and they have potential for advancement. I have potential for advancement too, I countered. This position could lead to. Emma, my mother cut in, you look like you've gained weight since we last saw you. All that studying and stress eating, I suppose. You really should be careful. No one takes a heavy woman seriously in professional settings. The abrupt change of subject was a familiar tactic designed to throw me off balance and reassert control of the conversation. I felt my cheeks flush but forced myself to take a sip of water instead of responding to the bait. The institute is very well respected, I continued, determined to make them understand the value of my opportunity. Their research has influenced educational policy across the country. Policy, my father repeated with a slight sneer. Politics and paperwork, you could have been a surgeon, Emma, or a corporate attorney. You had the test scores, the intelligence. Instead, you'll spend your days asking people about their feelings. The main courses arrived: filet mignon for my father, sea bass for my mother, and roasted duck for me. The timing provided a brief respite from the criticism, but it didn't last long. We ran into the gardeners last week, my mother said as she delicately cut her fish. Their son just finished his first year at Harvard Medical, top of his class. Good for him, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. He was in your advanced placement classes in high school, wasn't he? My father asked, though he knew perfectly well that he was. Same opportunities, but he chose to apply himself to something substantial. Each word felt like a small cut. I had graduated with honors, secured a position at a respected institution, and was about to begin a career I was passionate about. Yet in their eyes, I had failed because I hadn't chosen the path they wanted. Psychology is asterisk substantial, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Understanding human behavior and emotional development has real-world applications. My research could help identify early intervention strategies for at-risk youth. My father took a long sip of his wine before responding. Your mother and I have been patient, Emma. We allowed you to pursue this interest of yours. We thought perhaps you'd come to your senses before graduation, realize the limitations you were placing on yourself. It's not a limitation to follow your passion, I countered. Passion, my mother sighed as if the very word was distasteful. Passion doesn't pay mortgages or build retirement accounts. Practical choices do. The conversation continued in this vein throughout the main course. My attempts to explain my career choice met with dismissal or derision. I felt myself shrinking in my seat, the old, familiar feeling of inadequacy creeping over me like a cold shadow. As the waiter cleared our plates, my father ordered another bottle of wine without asking if anyone wanted it. When it arrived, he held up his glass in what appeared to be another toast. My heart lifted slightly. Perhaps, despite their criticism, they were still proud of me in some small way. I'd like to say something, my father began, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for speeches at business functions. Today marks the completion of your education, Emma, and while it's not the path we would have chosen for you, your mother and I acknowledge your persistence. It wasn't exactly warm praise, but it was something. I raised my glass slightly, waiting for him to continue. However, he went on, his expression hardening, I feel it necessary to express our disappointment. With your capabilities, you could have contributed meaningfully to society. Instead, you chose a soft science with questionable methodologies. When we look at the other parents today celebrating children who will become doctors, lawyers, business leaders, well, he paused, exchanging a look with my mother. Sometimes we wish you were never born. Then we wouldn't have to explain your disappointing choices to our friends. The words hit me like a physical blow. I froze, my glass still halfway raised, unable to process what I'd just heard. My mother didn't contradict him or come to my defense. Instead, she nodded slightly as if what he'd said was perfectly reasonable. The restaurant around us seemed to go silent, though I'm sure that was just my perception as shock washed over me. A waiter who had been approaching our table with dessert menus stopped abruptly, clearly having overheard, and awkwardly retreated. Diners at nearby tables glanced over, then quickly away, embarrassed to have witnessed such a moment. I couldn't breathe, the room seemed to spin slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. 22 years of criticism and emotional neglect had culminated in this statement, a clear, unambiguous declaration that my existence was a disappointment to them. In that moment, something inside me that had been bending for years finally broke, but instead of collapsing, I felt a strange clarity emerging through the pain. These people would never see me, they would never value me. And I had spent far too long trying to earn love that should have been freely given. The silence at our table stretched like an eternity. My father took a casual sip of his wine as if he hadn't just said something devastating. My mother adjusted her napkin, avoiding eye contact. Around us, the restaurant had resumed its normal hum of conversation, but several nearby diners were still casting concerned glances our way. I set my glass down with a controlled motion, feeling strangely calm despite the earthquake happening inside me. My hands, which should have been shaking, were steady. With deliberate movements, I placed my napkin beside my plate and slowly stood up. Both my parents looked up, my father with irritation, my mother with confusion. "Emma, we haven't finished dinner," she said, as if that were the issue at hand. I looked at them both, these two people who had brought me into the world but never truly seen me. When I spoke, my voice was clear and unwavering, surprising even myself. "If that's what you wish, then consider me as if I never existed. Live your lives as though there was never a daughter named Emma." The entire restaurant went silent. A waiter dropped a spoon somewhere in the background, the clatter almost comically loud in the hushed atmosphere. "From this moment forward," I continued, "you no longer have to explain me or my choices to anyone. You no longer have to feel disappointed by my existence. I release you from the burden of having a daughter who dared to follow her own path instead of living the life you prescribed." My father's face flushed dark red. "Emma, you're making a scene. Sit down immediately." "No," I said simply. "I will not sit down, not today, not ever again. For 22 years I've tried to earn your approval, your love. I see now that was never possible, not because I failed, but because you were incapable of giving it." I picked up my small clutch purse from beside my chair. "Thank you for dinner and for the clarity. I finally understand that I'll never be enough for you, but here's what you failed to see. I am more than enough for myself." With that, I turned and walked through the silent restaurant, my head high despite the tears threatening to spill. I could feel every eye on me, but for once I didn't care what anyone thought, not the other diners, not the staff, and especially not my parents. It wasn't until I reached my car in the parking lot that the composure cracked. My hands shook so badly I couldn't get the key into the ignition. The tears came then in heaving sobs that bent me over the steering wheel. All the years of seeking validation, of trying to be perfect, of hoping that someday I'd be enough, it all poured out of me in that parking lot. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, I managed to calm myself enough to drive. Without conscious thought, I headed straight to Sarah's apartment. She opened the door, took one look at my tear-stained face, and pulled me into a tight hug without saying a word. "They said they wish I had never been born," I whispered against her shoulder. "Then they don't deserve you," she replied firmly, guiding me to her couch. "Not one bit of you." I collapsed onto her sofa as she went to make tea. The weight of what had happened finally hit me fully. My phone started buzzing in my purse, texts and calls from my parents. I pulled it out to silence it and saw the messages already coming through. "You're overreacting. This display was childish and embarrassing. Call us immediately so we can discuss your behavior." Not one apology, not one acknowledgement of the cruelty of their words, just blame and demands for compliance as always. Sarah returned with mugs of tea and took the phone from my hand, reading the messages with growing anger. "Unbelievable," she muttered, setting the phone face down on the coffee table. "You're not calling them back tonight." She called Ethan, who arrived 20 minutes later with ice cream and a fierce protectiveness that made me cry all over again, but this time from gratitude. These two people who had no obligation to me by blood or law showed more care in one evening than my parents had in my entire life. We stayed up late, talking through what had happened and what might come next. Neither of them tried to minimize my pain or offer platitudes about family, always working things out. Instead, they validated my feelings and supported my right to protect myself from further harm. "You can stay here as long as you need," Sarah offered. "My couch is your couch." I finally fell asleep around 3:00 in the morning, emotionally exhausted but with a strange sense of peace beneath the pain. For the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself completely, without apology or compromise. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through Sarah's living room windows, and my phone showed 37 missed calls and messages. I scrolled through them briefly, my parents alternating between demands that I apologize for making a scene and attempts at guilt that grew increasingly desperate as the night had worn on. Reading their words with morning clarity, I saw something I'd never fully recognized before. They had no power over me anymore. I was an adult with a degree, a job offer, and the ability to make my own choices. The only hold they had was emotional, and I could choose to break that hold. Sitting there on Sarah's couch, still in my Navy graduation dress from the day before, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I would take the job in Seattle, move across the country, and truly live as if I had no parents, not out of spite or revenge, but as an act of self-preservation and growth. I need to disappear from their lives completely, I told Sarah when she emerged from her bedroom. It's the only way I'll ever be free. She nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Then that's what will help you do. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. I formally accepted the position at the Bowman Institute, giving them my start date of August 1st, just 6 weeks away. Sarah and Ethan helped me create a strategic exit plan that would minimize any contact with my parents. First, I changed my phone number, giving the new one only to trusted friends and professional contacts. I set up email filters to send my parents messages directly to a folder I wouldn't have to see. I closed all social media accounts and created new ones under slightly different variations of my name with strict privacy settings. My lease was ending at the end of the month anyway, so I accelerated my moving plans. Sarah and Ethan helped me pack my apartment into boxes, which we stored temporarily in Ethan's garage. I sold my furniture rather than dealing with moving it across the country, keeping only books, clothes, and personal items that would fit in my car. "Are you sure about driving all that way alone?" Sarah asked as we taped up another box. "I need the time to think," I explained. 3,000 miles of open road and new beginnings. The hardest part was dealing with the remaining financial connections. I had a joint bank account that had been established when I was a teenager. I opened a new account at a different bank and transferred my portion of the funds. I wrote a check returning every penny my parents had contributed to my education since my grandmother's passing with a brief note. "This clears any financial obligation between us." Through it all, my parents continued their attempts to contact me, first with anger, then with fake concern about my mental state, then with threats to file a missing person report despite knowing exactly where I was. Their messages revealed their true worry, not my well-being, but how my disappearance would look to others in their social circle. "Your father had to make excuses at the club yesterday," my mother wrote in one email that made it past my filters. "People are asking questions." This behavior reflects poorly on all of us. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on preparing for my new life in Seattle. I researched neighborhoods, looking for an affordable apartment in a safe area. I studied the transit system and local amenities. I read everything I could about the Bowman Institute and the specific research projects I'd be joining. Exactly 1 week after graduation, Sarah, Ethan, and I loaded my Honda Civic with my essential belongings. The trunk and back seat were packed with carefully labeled boxes, leaving just enough room for a small overnight bag on the passenger seat. "Here's an emergency credit card," Sarah said, pressing a card into my hand. "Ethan and I got it for you just in case." "And this is from both of us," Ethan added, handing me a sealed envelope. "Don't open it until you reach Seattle." I hugged them both, fighting tears. "I can't thank you enough." "Just build a good life," Sarah said. "That's all the thanks we need." The drive across the country became a kind of therapy. Each mile put physical distance between me and my past. I stayed in modest motels, ate at local diners, and watched the landscape change from the familiar Northeast to the wide-open plains of the Midwest, through the mountains, and finally to the lush greenery of the Pacific Northwest. Along the way, I had a lot of time to think about family, what it should be versus what mine had been, about my future, what I wanted versus what had been expected of me, about healing, how to move forward without carrying the weight of rejection with me. Seattle welcomed me with misty rain and spectacular views of mountains and water. My first apartment was a small studio in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, nothing fancy, but all mine with no expectations attached to the walls. I filled it with secondhand furniture, bright throw pillows, and bookshelves that I stocked with psychology texts and novels my parents would have dismissed as frivolous. On my first official day at the Bowman Institute, I opened the envelope from Sarah and Ethan. Inside was a card that read, "Family is who loves you for exactly who you are. We are your family now and always." Along with it was a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant shaped like a phoenix, the mythical bird that rises from ashes to begin anew. I wore that necklace on my first day, drawing strength from it as I navigated the complex halls of the Institute. Dr. Harper, my supervisor, was a brilliant woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense attitude and unexpectedly kind eyes. "Emma Thompson," she said, reviewing my file. "Summa cum laude, excellent recommendations from Dr. Klein. I have high expectations for you." "I won't disappoint you," I promised and meant it. The work was challenging and fulfilling. I helped design research protocols, conducted interviews with study participants, analyzed data, and contributed to papers that would eventually be published in respected journals. For the first time in my life, my intelligence and work ethic were appreciated rather than taken for granted. Outside of work, I slowly built a new social circle. My neighbor Olivia, a graphic designer with a contagious laugh, invited me to a book club. There I met Liam, a high school English teacher with thoughtful eyes and a quiet confidence I found intriguing. Neither of them knew anything about my past, and I found it liberating to be known only as the person I was becoming, not the daughter who had never been enough. 6 months passed without any contact with my parents. They had eventually stopped calling my old number and sending emails when they received no response. Through a mutual family friend, I heard they were telling people I'd had some kind of breakdown after graduation and needed time to sort myself out. The same friend reported that they seemed more concerned with managing appearances than with my actual well-being. I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Carter, who specialized in family trauma. Our weekly sessions were often painful but clarifying. "What your parents said to you was emotional abuse," she stated plainly in one session, "and from what you've described, it was part of a lifelong pattern." "I still feel guilty sometimes," I admitted, "for cutting them off completely." "Guilt is common in children of emotionally unavailable parents," she explained. "You were conditioned to believe that their happiness and comfort were your responsibility, but they were the parents. Your well-being should have been their priority, not the other way around." Working with Dr. Carter, I began to understand how deeply my parents' treatment had affected me. My perfectionism, my anxiety, my tendency to apologize for taking up space. Recognizing these patterns was the first step toward changing them. The first holiday season away from my family brought unexpected challenges. Thanksgiving and Christmas had never been particularly warm in our household, but they were familiar traditions nonetheless. Now I faced them alone, 3,000 miles from anyone I'd known longer than a few months. Olivia noticed my mood dipping as November arrived. "First holidays are the hardest," she said, though I hadn't told her my situation. "Come to my family's Thanksgiving. My mom always cooks for an army, and we have a strict no-questions policy for strays." I accepted gratefully and found myself at a chaotic, loving family gathering that bore no resemblance to the formal, tense holiday meals of my childhood. Olivia's parents argued good-naturedly about the proper way to carve a turkey, her brothers told embarrassing stories about each other, and her grandmother insisted on second helpings for everyone. No one asked about my family or why I wasn't with them. For Christmas, Liam invited me to join a group of friends for what they called Misfit Christmas, a gathering of people who, for various reasons, weren't with biological family for the holiday. We exchanged inexpensive but thoughtful gifts, played board games, and sang off-key carols. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm and genuine. Slowly, I was building new traditions and connections. My work at the Institute was going exceptionally well. I had received my first promotion after just 1 year, becoming a research coordinator with more responsibility and better pay. I had made friends who knew nothing of my past but appreciated who I was in the present. 2 years after graduation, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, a significant upgrade from my first studio, and looked out at the Seattle skyline. I was wearing the phoenix necklace from Sarah and Ethan, who remained steadfast friends despite the distance. We video chatted regularly, and they had even flown out to visit once. "You seem different," Sarah had observed during that visit, more confident. "I am asterisk different," I had replied. "I'm becoming who I was always meant to be." Standing on that balcony 2 years after the dinner that had changed everything, I realized an important truth. In wishing I had never been born, my parents had inadvertently set me free to be reborn as the person I chose to be, not the one they had tried to force me to become. The email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, nearly 2.5 years after I had walked out of El Shadow and out of my parents' lives. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk." My father had somehow obtained my work email, which was publicly listed on the Bowman Institute website. The message was brief: "Your mother and I will be in Seattle next weekend for a medical conference. We would like to meet with you. Please respond with a time and place." No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just the expectation that I would comply as I always had before. I sat staring at the screen, my heart racing, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. The life I'd built in Seattle felt suddenly fragile, as if their mere presence in the same city might shatter my hard-won peace. I forwarded the email to Dr. Carter and asked for an emergency session that evening. She fit me in at 7:00 after her regular appointments. "You don't owe them a meeting," she reminded me as I sat anxiously in her office. "Your boundaries are valid and necessary." "I know," I said, "but part of me thinks that if I don't see them, they'll continue to have power over me, like I'm still running, still afraid." We discussed the options, the potential outcomes, and most importantly, what I needed to protect my own well-being. "If you decide to meet them," Dr. Carter advised, "do it on your terms. A public place, a time limit, clear boundaries, and have support ready afterward." After careful consideration, I replied to my father's email. "I will meet you at Westlake Coffee Shop Saturday at 11 a.m. I can stay for 30 minutes only." The coffee shop was busy enough to be public but quiet enough for conversation. It was near Liam's apartment, where I planned to go immediately after. Both Olivia and Liam knew what was happening and had promised to be available if I needed them. When Saturday arrived, I dressed carefully in a professional outfit that made me feel confident: charcoal gray slacks, a blue silk blouse, and the phoenix necklace for courage. I arrived 15 minutes early to select a table in the corner where I could see the door. They entered precisely at 11, looking older than I remembered but otherwise unchanged. My father in a business casual outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, my mother in a designer dress with her pearl necklace. They spotted me immediately and made their way over, my father leading with purposeful strides. "Emma," he said, extending his hand as if this were a business meeting, "you look well." I shook his hand briefly but didn't rise for the hug my mother seemed to expect. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the chairs across from me. "Would you like coffee?" "We already ordered at the counter," my mother replied, her eyes scanning me critically. "You've lost weight." Of course, that would be her first observation. "How did you find my work email?" I asked, skipping the small talk. "Your father has connections," she replied vaguely. "We've been trying to reach you for some time." "I wasn't hiding," I said. "I simply chose not to be in contact." An uncomfortable silence fell. My father cleared his throat. "Your behavior has been extremely distressing to your mother. The way you left that dinner, cutting off all contact, it was immature and hurtful." I felt a familiar anger rising but kept my voice steady. "Do you remember what you said to me at that dinner?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Everyone says things they don't mean in the heat of the moment." "You told me you wished I had never been born," I stated plainly. "That wasn't the heat of the moment. That was the culmination of a lifetime of criticism and conditional love." "You're exaggerating," my mother interjected. "We've always wanted what's best for you." "No," I corrected her. "You've always wanted what you think is best for yourselves. A daughter who reflects well on you, who makes choices you can brag about to your friends, not a daughter who is authentic and happy." The barista called their names, and my father went to retrieve their drinks. My mother leaned forward. This little rebellion has gone on long enough, Emma. People are asking questions. Your father has had to make excuses at his firm. It reflects poorly on us. And there it was, their true concern, not my well-being but their image. When my father returned and set their elaborate coffee drinks on the table, I decided to be direct. Why are you really here? What do you want from me? They exchanged glances. We want things to go back to normal, my father said. Family should be in contact. The holidays have been awkward without you. Awkward, I repeated, not sad or incomplete, awkward. That's not what I meant, he backtracked. I think it's exactly what you meant, I replied. And that's the problem. I was never a person to you, just an extension of yourselves, a reflection of your expectations. When I chose my own path, I became an inconvenience and embarrassment. That's unfair, my mother protested weakly. Is it? I asked. You've been here for 5 minutes and haven't once asked about my life, my work, my happiness. You've only mentioned how my absence affects you. They looked taken aback, as if this perspective had never occurred to them. I've built a life here, I continued. A good life. I have friends who value me for who I am, not what I achieve. I have work that matters to me and makes a difference in the world. I have peace. We're still your parents, my father said, his tone carrying the authority that once would have silenced me immediately. Biology made you my parents, I acknowledged. But you chose not to be my family. Family supports, family accepts, family loves unconditionally. You did none of those things. My mother's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in years. We do love you, Emma, in our way. Your way was harmful, I said gently. It took me years of therapy to understand that I'm worthy of love exactly as I am, not for my achievements or compliance, but simply for being me. My father shifted uncomfortably. Therapy, he muttered, always looking for someone to blame. I'm not blaming you for who you are, I clarified. I'm holding you accountable for your actions and protecting myself from further harm. I glanced at my watch. 20 minutes had passed. I have 10 minutes left. If there's anything meaningful you want to say, now's the time. My directness seemed to unsettle them. They'd come expecting either the compliant daughter they'd controlled for years or perhaps an angry confrontation they could dismiss as emotional instability. My calm clarity left them without their usual scripts. After a long pause, my father spoke. What would it take to reestablish contact? It was a transactional question, typical of him, but at least it was honest. First, a genuine acknowledgement of the harm done, not just at that dinner, but throughout my life, I said. Second, respect for my boundaries and choices going forward. Third, a willingness to build a new relationship based on mutual respect, not authority and obedience. And if we can't meet those conditions, my mother asked quietly. Then we remain as we are, I replied. I'll continue my life without you in it. The choice is yours. They didn't know how to respond to this reversal of power. For the first time in our relationship, I was setting the terms, not them. As our time drew to a close, I stood to leave. I have to go. I have plans with friends. Can we contact you again? My mother asked hesitantly. I wrote my personal email on a napkin and slid it across the table. This is the only contact information I'm comfortable sharing right now. If you decide you can meet my conditions, you can reach me here. But please understand, I won't respond to manipulation, guilt, or demands. I walked out of the coffee shop feeling lighter than I'd expected. There had been no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful apologies or promises of change. But I had spoken my truth calmly and clearly, and for once they had been forced to listen. Liam was waiting at his apartment with comfort food and no pressure to talk until I was ready. When I finally shared what had happened, he listened attentively. Are you okay? He asked when I finished. Surprisingly, yes, I replied. For so long I was afraid of confronting them, afraid they still had power over me, but they don't, not anymore. Over the following months, my parents made halting, imperfect attempts at communication, an email acknowledging that perhaps they had been overly critical at times, a birthday card with a gift certificate, and an awkward note about being proud of my dedication. Small steps that showed they were at least trying to understand what I needed, even if they weren't fully capable of providing it. I maintained firm boundaries, responding only to genuine attempts at connection and ignoring anything that felt manipulative or controlling. Sometimes weeks would pass without contact. I was okay with that. The relationship, such as it was, existed on my terms now. Meanwhile, my life continued to flourish. My research on emotional resilience in adolescence was selected for publication in a major journal. I developed close friendships with people who appreciated my sensitivity rather than seeing it as a weakness. My relationship with Liam deepened into something meaningful and supportive, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The healing was ongoing. There were still days when old insecurities surfaced, when I questioned my worth or sought external validation. But those days grew fewer and farther between as I learned to recognize my own value apart from others' approval. 3 years after that devastating graduation dinner, I stood at a podium presenting my research findings at a national conference. As I spoke confidently about the importance of emotional validation in healthy development, I caught sight of the phoenix pendant resting against my collarbone and smiled slightly at the symbolism. The journey from that restaurant to this podium had been long and often painful. But like the phoenix, I had emerged from the ashes of rejection stronger and more authentic than before. The words that were meant to destroy me, asterisk, we wish you were never born, asterisk, had instead been the catalyst for my rebirth. What I learned through it all was something I now share with the young people in my research studies. Your worth is inherent, not earned. Your value doesn't depend on someone else's ability to see it, and sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you were born into. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family members who couldn't accept your choices? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through difficult family dynamics. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message of hope and self-worth, please share this with them. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you are worthy of love exactly as you are.